everyone, and welcome to this little demo that we're going to do about the Scorekeeper package. So in this demo, I'm going to show you an example score sheet and how the Scorekeeper package can be used to score your data. So we're going to start off, I'm going to pull up this score sheet, and the score sheet I'm going to pull up is a score sheet in Excel. Again, you can use any type of, CSV format is fine, our data format is fine, but .csv, .excel, both work. As you can see here, there are the 11 columns. If you haven't watched the first videos, I recommend getting oriented in those first introductory videos to what a score sheet is. And here we see, again, 11 columns. This one particularly has 28 rows, and that's going to be based on what we're doing here. That's going to vary, but the 11 column structure will stay the same. And the first thing that you can do, as I've mentioned in my previous videos, is I like to have a step 0 where I just identify what are the raw variables that I'm using. And that's what I do here, as you can see in rows 2 through 8 here. And these are the raw variables. This is their name. There's NA for new variable because it's just raw. And this is the variable label, and this is the raw variable label, the initial one. I put operation raw, step equals 0. Because I put this, it's not going to be needed in the R. I could delete all of these rows. The score sheet would run the exact same way, but it's useful for me to have for my metadata. These are the initial value labels, and then I have NA in the other columns. The first step that I'm going to do is I want to select just the variables that I'm interested in, which are these, 7 variables here, 7 variables, plus the ID number. So I am going to select those in step 1. So I identify which variables that I want to select, and the operation there is going to be select, step equals 1, and that is it. That's our step 1. The next thing I want to do is I'm going to account for some skip logic that was in the variables. So for instance, if individuals answered no to this first question, CCQ 360, that they didn't go on any eating binges during the past year, they weren't asked the next several questions. And I want to actually, if they said no to CCQ 360, which would be a 1 in kind of how it's initially coded, then I am going to code them as a no in the next 5, which currently is a 3. So we're going to need to change that too, but that's kind of what I'm going to do there. So I'm going to use my if-else logic to unskip those variables for people who were skipping them on the questionnaire. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to rename and recode my variables. So here you can see I am making the labels a little bit easier to interpret, taking away that initial kind of B12/B11 step at the beginning. And I'm renaming the variables from, for instance, CCQ 360 to binge underscore freak underscore D.14. So that's the frequency of binge eating dichotomized in that particular variable. And this is going to be step 3. Less than 1 time a month, I'm going to say, is absent. 1 time a month or more, I'm going to have as present. And this is how I'm going to recode that. That's what the initial values are going to change to in my new recoding. So I am doing that for the next several rows, and I do that for each of my variables. So you can see here I have 1 row for each variable that I'm wanting to recode. The next thing I want to do is create a quick sum score that is the sum of the number of binge eating symptoms that an individual reported at age 14, and I'm going to sum all of those binge eating symptoms that I just created from CCQ 370 through 375, which are now those binge underscore variables. So I'm going to sum those in step 4, and then I am going to create a little algorithmic scoring here, which essentially states that if you reported binge eating in the first question and you have more than 2 symptoms, I am going to say that you had a presence of binge eating, and this could be like a diagnostic level binge eating at age 14, but you had to have both of those. You both had to have, binge eating be present at age 14 and, 2 of these other symptoms. And then I'm also going to create a new, in this same step, create another way of thinking about these symptoms, which is maybe I want to split them into absent, mild, and severe, where if you don't have any symptoms, you're going to be absent. If you have, 1 or 2, you might be mild, and more than 2, you might be severe. And so, or more than 3, sorry, this is how I coded it. So that is what I coded right here. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to filter anyone who had missing data on every one of these, because in a large data set, it might be easier for me to just filter out the missings to make sure if you were missing everything, to make sure that my code is going right and it's recoding as expected. So it's just going to clean that up a little bit for me. And then I am going to select just the variables that I want in my cleaned data. This is the data that I have that I'm going to use in my analytic code, for instance. I'm going to select those in step 6. And then I decided in step 7 that this binge symptom sum split was really a big mouthful. And so I'm just going to call that binge_severity with a rename code in step 7. So that is what a score sheet looks like. So now, with this score sheet, again, Excel sheet, once you do it a few times, it gets pretty, you can get pretty snappy at it and understand the logic and what needs to go where. Once I have that done, then I am going to bring this into our studio. So and I would actually suggest, as you build your score sheets, maybe even building them like one step at a time and making sure each step runs so that you can kind of check yourself at each step, saying like, okay, it did select the variables that I wanted. It did recode in the right way. And you can kind of check it as you go along and then get your final stuff. So this is what my companion file looks like. And the companion file is what I use to say, this is how I scored the data. This is going to be part of my data dictionary for this. And you can see that the way that I set it up in our lab, we have 3 sections. First, we start off with the background about the measure. And this is an example. And we use those 7 items from the LSPEC cohort. This is the link to the scale that was used. And then I have a links to a few other articles that have previously used this data and previously scored the data. And then I go through exactly what I verbalized as I was going through the score sheet. This is what is done in step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, all the way through. And then I identify at the end, maybe I'm wanting to like remember what key variables I might be interested in for analysis. And here's where I identify those key variables. And then this is the code. This is all the code you need to run this, to clean your data. And if you ever want to adjust the variables, adjust how they're coded, you just go to the score sheet, you update a couple rows, and you just rerun this, and that's it. And it's, just a few lines of code. The first one loads in my raw data. The second one loads in that score sheet. And then the third line is actually doing that Scorekeep function. So it is cleaning all my data. The 7th table, because we had 7 steps, is going to be my cleaned data. And then I'm going to save that into a file called bingeclean.rdata. So what I will do is I am actually just going to knit this file And hopefully it should give me an HTML document, which in a pretty way shows me my data dictionary, and it'll clean all of my data for me. So let's see. Okay, and that is done, and it took about 10 seconds to clean that data. Again, it wasn't a lot of data, so it was only a few rows, but it should not take a long time. Even with, I have larger data sets of thousands and thousands. It shouldn't take a long time to do this. I have this beautiful HTML file. I can click that. It's going to take me to those links. It's going to take me to that paper in PubMed. And I have this information that walks me through the score sheet. It says, this is how the data was scored step by step. Here are my key variables. And in my file, I also have the raw score sheet. So if anyone wants to replicate it, they can just take my score sheet, run these, sub out their data in here, run this, and they'll have some beautiful clean data. So let's look at the cleaned data. So it saved it as, binge clean. So I'm going to load that data. And this is what it looks like. So this was, and I'm going to bring the raw data up just as a comparison. So this was the raw data. You see those -10s, those -1s. Things are a little funky. We need to adjust how the variable names aren't informative. Once we've cleaned it, looks much better. I've gotten rid of a couple of rows where people didn't have any data. And I have cleaned all that data. We got rid of the negatives. We filled in that skip logic. And we also created some sum scores of the symptom sums, the frequency, all of that stuff. So that's what it looks like to use Scorekeeper. If you have